Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to the STEM Space podcast. I am excited to have this conversation today, as what started out as somebody reaching out on Instagram and now has turned into something that I am distracted in my work because I keep going on deep dives into all of their things. Before we talk more about those questions that I might have for our guests today, I want to introduce them to you. We have Audrey, Gilfillan, and Alison West. Welcome to the STEM Space podcast.
Thanks, Claire. We're really excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's start out with each one of you. Audrey, can you please explain a little bit about your background and what you do?
Absolutely. So I am a licensed therapist based in Boulder, Colorado. And so my primary full-time job is I'm an embedded therapist at the university here in Boulder. And it's kind of a unique job where I work for the counseling center along with Alison, but then we're actually both embedded within the engineering school. So our offices are in the engineering school. We specifically work with engineering students. And then Alison and I also own a business called Applied Wellness Initiatives, where we support managers and also engineering teams around mental health and work and performance, and helping them navigate that intersection of mental health and work academic goals. And so we offer a lot of workshops, consultation, coaching to support that process. And then we also have a book together called Decompile Your Mind, an engineer's guide to thoughts and emotions. And we wrote this book kind of for engineers, engineering-minded folks, to help break down the concepts of the mind, the distressing thoughts, emotions, how to make sense of them, and really kind of what to do with them.
Amazing. And
you cut out for a second. Did you say my name?
Sorry about that. Yes, Alison, can you tell us about you?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, Audrey and I have basically the same bios. We've been working very closely together for the past like 4.5 years. And so, yeah, I am also embedded in the College of Engineering at CU Boulder. I work with students for individual therapy, and then also work closely with like staff and faculty to like do some programming. We do some outreaches as well. And yeah, in the business space, Audrey and I provide consulting for both people in education and also in the industry world as well. So I don't have much else to add to the bio there other than same. Yeah.
We work closely together.
Well, I feel like there is a lot that goes into that's you've distilled really well into a quick bio, because Alison, I believe it was you who reached out on social media to us and said you were listening to our podcast, which I'm so excited that you found us in your space. But you mentioned that you just wrote this book, Decompile Your Mind, an engineer's guide to thoughts and emotions. And I was like, what is that for engineers? Like, there's therapy for engineers? Like, where have you been all of my life? And so I actually have started reading your book. I found it on Kindle Unlimited, which I just dove into it. And so I'm not even close to hitting all of the meat, but I felt like it was really speaking to me because I started reading it thinking, oh, this will be really helpful for educators who are in STEM and even teaching K-12 and getting students' minds kind of alleviated of some of the pressures that I felt going through engineering, and like, oh, maybe this will help me also talk to my husband, who's also an engineer, and helping him process some of his emotions that I know he has, even though he does not show them. But I felt like it was talking to me. I was flipping through, trying to get, okay, where's the solutions to my problems? And even an introduction, it's like, slow down. I was like, okay. Okay, I got this. And then all of the tables that are in there and really accessible figures and charts. I'm like, you wrote this for engineers. You obviously really understand this population. So taking a step back, can you tell me about what is the, and I'm going to use engineering terms here, which you girls are so gifted at using engineering language. What is the problem that you saw that you provided this book as a solution, or what was your motivation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, firstly, I want to say my husband is an engineer, and so really I just wrote a book to understand him, it feels like. So on a personal level, that's sort of where it all started. Like my interest in like how, you know, his brain works a little differently than mine, and then then I fell into this whole career path, which is really amazing. The problem that we and I'm gonna maybe take a risk, and I don't want to overgeneralize engineers by any means. However, we've noticed some trends, right? And so the problem that they think they're coming in with is their emotions, that they need to get rid of them, that they shouldn't be feeling a certain way, that they just need to get back to their problem solving skills, and they which aren't working in getting rid of their emotions, right? And so from our perspective, that really isn't the real problem. Like our human brains work in a very predictable way. A lot of the time, we all have emotions that come up and come and go, and a lot of the time, you know, they can be distressing throughout the day. And so instead of the distressing emotions and also distressing thoughts being the issue, the real issue is the avoidance of them, the unwillingness to work through them. And to their credit, to the engineering students' credit, there isn't a whole lot of guidance for that typically. Like, how do you process emotions, or how do you process in a way that doesn't fall into overthinking and overanalyzing, which is also distressing, right? And so, you know, we help them work through that in our step-by-step approach.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll add on to that. I think engineers are trained with a really kind of unique, important set of skills of being able to be analytical thinkers, logical, kind of discerning, you know, and a lot of times they'll come into the first session explaining, you know, this is what I need to get out of it. And they'll approach their distress as they would approach an engineering problem, you know, and in some ways that's amazing, right? Because they're really motivated and they're really creative, right? And they're really like, okay, let's try this, let's troubleshoot. And in some ways that can be really helpful, right? But then there's also times where that exact approach is actually what exacerbates the distress. And so we want to kind of say, okay, yes, you have this engineering set of skills, lean into that. And how do you discern when those engineering skills are actually adding to this distress? And what is a new set of skills that's going to be more effective in kind of the unique way the logic of the mind works?
I think that is super helpful and very evident in your book how, I mean, you using the words you use, decompile, you're separating those different pieces of the logic part and the emotional part, and really identifying those things to be able to move forward, and you make it in such an accessible way. I wondered how do you approach this? Is it the same for both the students that you're talking to, or have you worked with professional engineers, or maybe even kids that are in high school that are kind of wired this way to think the logical, analytical, suppress emotion because I need to figure it out? Do you approach it the same way of identifying? What does the process look like there?
Yeah, I mean, I think our primary group that we've worked with up until this point are college students, but then also graduate students. So there's kind of some age range. I think the grad students we work with give us a unique lens because a lot of them have come from industry previously. And so, you know, I think part of the job of a therapist is, okay, what are the trends? What are these like bigger picture cultural factors? But then also, how do we meet the individual where they're at? And so I think broad strokes, I think engineers across the board do have a tendency to approach things in this logical way, but I think of course, we're like meeting the individual kind of where they're at, depending on their like particular comfort with emotions.
I will say working with, like freshmen and sophomore engineers, there is some like clear flexibility that they have still, that they haven't, had quite as much life experience to sort of solidify some of the habits that we see in older people. And so I really do enjoy working with the younger folks. They, bring a certain energy and openness to the space. So yeah, it's not that the approach is necessarily that different. It's more of like the conversation maybe goes in different directions because of that openness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. A couple things you touched on there is, Alison, you said the habits that you see happening, being formed. What are some of those habits that you see to trend in engineering? Or can I use maybe a broader term of like high achievers? Because I see a lot of that in my even elementary students that I'm saying, ooh, I can see a lot of the engineer mindset in the high achieving students there. What are some of those habits that might complicate things as they move forward in their education?
Yeah, well, the one that comes to mind for me first, and habits, the way I'm thinking of it right now is habits of mind, right? Habits of thought pattern, and especially high achieving students, right? They want to perform, they want to do better. And what we see all of the time is that there's such a habit of self-criticism, right? Like if they make a mistake, they beat themselves up, right? They say really kind of nasty things to themselves. And I think that motivation or the intention, maybe the subconscious intention of that self-critical thought pattern is because they're like, well, I have to motivate myself. I need to do better. So let me push myself by being really harsh and critical of myself. But really, there's a lot of research to show that self-criticism has the opposite impact, right? Like maybe in the moment it can kind of help push you, but over time it's going to result in burnout, not being willing to take risks, really kind of maybe more closed-mindedness versus more of a self-compassionate response to mistakes, where it's like, oh yeah, that was really disappointing, that didn't work out. And, I can still be kind to myself. I can still know that I'm worthy, and it's okay to make mistakes. And then I can bounce back and try something new.
Yes, I feel that a lot and see that a lot with my students. And something that when you're talking about the research shows, I feel like when you're talking to a high achieving student or an engineer, they will ignore those kind of words of like, don't be hard on yourself. They'll be like, okay, but I need it. Like you can have that opinion, but when you say things like, well, the research shows, or there's this data, then it's like, oh, okay, I will tune in and listen. Like this is a trend here. And I think that speaks a lot to maybe a culture of what's happened in engineering. Is that something that you noticed? You, Audrey, I think mentioned culture earlier. Is there a culture around engineering or high achieving that we're also fighting?
Mm-hmm.
And what does that look like?
Yeah. Do you want to take this or I can take it?
Yeah, I'll start. Yeah, when I think of engineering culture, I think of, individuals who are really motivated and curious and high achieving and just really driven individuals, right? And with that comes some competition, right? There's an inherent competitiveness in the engineering space, and I think it gets really intense at the college level. And I also think that when things get that competitive, it can be pretty stressful. And what we've noticed is that, we have people coming in to, they're so stressed out. They want to get rid of their stress. We talk about some ways to like help their stress and everything. And throughout that process, realize, wait, they're not sure if they want to get rid of the stress, because the stress is actually a part of their identity or a part of the culture, right? And so if they're not stressed, then are they doing enough? Are they doing enough to, achieve? Are their peers more stressed than them? Does that mean that they're, falling behind? So it's an interesting like protectiveness over their stress as well, which is, really interesting, and also puts us in a pretty interesting position as their therapists. How can we, help reduce your stress in a way that feels tolerable to you and that is going to serve you? And, what are some other ways we can look at that?
Yes, I could definitely see how that would be a big hurdle to overcome. I remember going through my undergrad in aerospace engineering, and it was like if you pulled an all-nighter, that was a badge of honor. Like, oh,
Yeah.
you must be a good engineering student. Oh, you're completely stressed out and you haven't eaten in a week. Wow, you must be really extra good at engineering. Those were, and I can imagine that's really hard to get somebody to first recognize, but then see it as a problem. Like, that's not okay. But I think what a gift it is that you are embedded in the engineering program to be able to witness all of this and maybe have an effect to change that kind of culture. And you mentioned you do workshops even for the faculty and the engineering professors to help maybe address some of these issues. What does that look like? What do you tell the teachers, like how they should work through some of this?
Yeah, so this has actually been a passion area of mine over the last several years. In my previous role, I worked as an academic coach, and so less on the clinical side, but more on helping students in academic distress and helping them kind of figure out what habits and behaviors can help them get, better meet their academic goals. And in that process, having a therapy background, right, kind of trying to figure out, as a coach, mental health is coming into all of my appointments, but I'm not a therapist. So what's my role? And so through that process, through that kind of just me being curious, developed this model called the scaffolded mental health support model. And then initially was for coaches, but then it's been applied to faculty and a whole group of folks. And it's a concrete way. Again, it's like this breaking down messy concepts into this really concrete linear way to say, okay, if a student is showing up in this way, here are some concrete guidelines for how you can respond. If they're showing up in this way, here's some concrete guidelines for how you can respond. And so it's kind of a 6-level model that really breaks down and helps faculty identify how to recognize when a student is showing or mental health is interacting with their academic experience. And then what are concrete ways you can respond to support the student and their academic goals. And being really mindful to respect their role as faculty or as educators and not as therapists, right? We're not wanting them to be therapists. I know a lot of faculty are feeling quite overwhelmed right now, and educators, I'm sure, in the K through 12 space, as mental health concerns are rising, more and more. And kind of saying, okay, I wasn't trained in this. Like, what do I do? How do I support them? I know these engineering concepts, but I was never trained to handle student distress or kind of be aware of that. And so it's kind of a way to help them incorporate some responses that can help the student's mental health within that academic context.
That is so helpful. And I'm assuming this is targeted for college students, but is that something that can be used at lower levels of education?
I mean, it's been a really adaptive model. I haven't applied it for younger kids, but I would love to, present it to educators. And I think what my approach has been when I've tried it with different audiences is share the model and then say, and how does this fit with your setting? What do I need to know that I'm missing within the setting? And it being really a collaborative process for the educators to think about, how can I apply this model in the context that in a way that works for me, and knowing that I know my students best.
And is there a way where educators who might be listening, can they access this model or resources related to it?
Yeah, so we have an article published in About Campus that goes through the model, so they're welcome to look that up. They can also email us in the contact information you share, and that's part of, we definitely are willing to do like a training for different groups on the model.
Great. We'll share links to that in the show notes for those who are interested. I could see that being really invaluable in how to address some of the issues that we see specifically in the STEM classroom with kids just getting too overwhelmed with the open-endedness. That's one of the problems with STEM in classrooms now in K-12 is that a lot of classes are so structured. You have your math class, there's problems, there's answers. You have your history class, and then there's fill in the blank, there's answers. You do everything a structured way, and then you get to STEM and then into engineering in college where it's more open-ended. There's these big problems, and you have to figure out, where do I pull from what toolkit? It's really stressful. I see other kids might be getting it, and it's clicking for them, but not for me, at least on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just really overwhelming. And for teachers to try to help retrain these kids of, I know this is totally different than anything you've ever done before. And nobody's there to kind of like walk you through and handhold. You have to kind of figure it out on your own at such young ages now. Giving teachers a way to help the students think through the emotions that they're dealing with so they can get that out of the way, as well as maybe even some physiological issues that might be going on. I know that can be a big stressor too, like mentioning lack of sleep in college, and that leads to all of their issues. But in my STEM classroom, I had a Lego wall that I used as a giant graph and would have students participate where each day I'd have a different prompt. And one of the graphs that I did was said, okay, I want you to first write down all of the things that you had for breakfast. And then we're going to talk about, the sugar content in whatever you had for breakfast. Like if you had a cinnamon roll or you had Cocoa Puffs, like we're pretty high up on your sugar level here. And then we're going to talk about how stressed you are about this activity that we just did, which was pretty much impossible. And I made it impossible so that they would be really stressed out. And you could see there was a strong correlation between the amount of sugar that you ate for breakfast, because you had that crash and then you're having this stressful situation, and what that can do. So identifying like, are you stressed out because you weren't fueled correctly? Or was it really just stress from not knowing what to do with this activity? So I think there's so much that goes into that. And I really appreciate what you're doing to kind of break that down and figure out how to help those with high achieving or engineering mindsets be able to wrap their head around what they're experiencing. So how can you, I know we're kind of limited on time here. We're kind of going over, but I want to kind of open the floor for you guys to provide maybe more insight on if you were to talk to an educator who might be a high school STEM teacher teaching engineering or science, something that mainly high achievers would be taking. What advice would you give them to help prepare their students as they're moving forward?
Yeah, I love this question, and it's really cool to be able to have this conversation, because by the time students get to us, they've heard many times that they're so gifted and so smart, and they a lot of times we're kind of a big fish in a small pond in K through 12. And of course, college is a much bigger pond. And so that transition going from the gifted one, the one who's going places, to just another student who's also really talented is a really, really rough transition. And so educators K through 12 are in a position where they can really reinforce a student's willingness to take risks and make mistakes, and do that for the sake of learning and growing, instead of just emphasizing the outcomes and achievements and all of that. And so I would say it's important to find opportunities to sort of normalize mistakes and and really like talk about failure and students' relationship to failure, maybe a chance for the educators to be a little vulnerable in that space of like their relationship with failure and how it's changed over the years, and sort of providing that perspective that how you feel now is not always going to be how you feel, and you can kind of start to shape that early on.
Yeah, I think you, Claire, just showed an example of that, right? Where you created kind of a nearly impossible task, right? In like a really low stakes environment, and just said, like, what is this like to be struggling? And like, what are some variables that are impacting how you're feeling about this? And helping them, I think in addition to engineering and calculus and physics, like these are all skills that we can develop. The skill of struggling, it's also a skill, right? And I think sometimes students in that first year, it's their first time really struggling in an academic context, because they've always been kind of deemed as the smart one, or things are easy and they don't have to put much effort. And so not only are they learning new challenging curriculum, but they are also having kind of potentially an existential moment of who am I, right? And so I think another thing for educators to keep in mind is, how are you helping students broaden their sense of self, right? Like, how are they, more than just the gifted student or the high achieving student? How are they more than just like the future engineer, right? It's like, oh, but you also like spending time with your friends, and you also like making this art project, and you're also curious about like nature, and and recognizing that they are more than just a good student. So then when their student identity is feeling insecure, because inevitably it will in a moment in the future, they know that they have other things in their sense of self that they can lean on to.
That is such a great perspective. And I think using the words that you use, and that's something that I really admire about Alison and Audrey, both of you, and those who are also doing similar work, of being able to use language to help identify things that maybe we don't even see in ourselves, or our children are not recognizing until somebody points it out, of you have an identity in the way you're being successful academically, and that's not who you are. And that's also temporary. Some of the things you're experiencing are temporary. That's so valuable, and something that I could tell my 3-year-old that she probably wouldn't understand, but we could work through that. And then of course you'd still need to have reminders when you have college students of this is not who you are. So I think that is so valuable. So just as we wrap up, I've just one last question from just your experience and all the work that you're doing, which thank you, by the way, for all the work you're doing for engineers in your small space that's making a big impact. Do you have any things that you have witnessed in your work that you would like educators to know? Even a trend, or maybe something else they should just be aware of, or something they should be addressing?
Obviously, edit that out.
We'll edit that little pause out. Yeah, I mean, one thing that's I'm also just curious to hear from you and other K-12 educators around this like epidemic of loneliness and how that's showing up in the school space. We're just seeing that at really high levels in college, that there's just this loneliness. And I think we have all these amazing staff in colleges that are really trying to be creative of like, how do we bring students together? How do we help bring community? But I think there's a lot of barriers, especially since COVID, especially with, phones, that make it just hard for students to connect and meet new people and take some risks socially to be vulnerable with some new people. And so I guess I would just want educators to be aware of that at a higher ed level. We're really aware of that. And so anything that they can do, I know it's a really hard question, but to help students feel more confident in building community and having kind of that really like open, playful, connective time with their peers is such an important skill that I think students in college are struggling with.
I really like that. And I think that is something that we talk about through our curriculum company. We separate STEM into 3 different stages. And so the third final stage are these big open-ended projects that you're mostly, a lot of times, that's what college is focused on. And then the stage 2 before that is the engineering design work, and they do engineering design challenges. But the first stage that we say is really critical in engineering are those skills, those foundational skills of teamwork and communication and collaboration. And if you miss that, those are really human skills, and you have to teach those and you have to practice them, right? And so I think, yeah, you've lost a lot of that with the pandemic because you weren't able to work and collaborate with kids in teams. And then it really is a struggle in STEM classrooms because you're no longer working individually on your own work and achieving your own grade or your own feedback. You're then no longer individualized, you're working in teams. And that is tough for a lot of kids. But yeah, definitely something that needs to be continuously worked on through higher ed, is what I'm hearing. So yeah, that's a great insight. Allison, do you have something to add?
Yeah, so educators, from what I've seen in the college space at least, sort of kind of fall into the same patterns that we see in our therapy sessions, where they have this idea about there's a right and wrong way to talk to someone about their mental health. So a lot of times, people who truly care about their students still may not have the conversation or may not respond when a student tells them like how stressed out they are. They may only like give the minimal response because they're not sure of like what to say or how to say it or the right way to handle it. And so I guess I would just like challenge that a little bit. Yes, there are, there's some good guidance out there, including our model, on how you can respond effectively. And mental health is something we all have. It's not the same as mental illness. That's a whole different thing with specific criteria that, we don't have enough time to get into that. But mental health is something that we all have, and it shows up in how we relate to others and how we manage our stress and focus and motivation. And these are all things that are essential pieces to having a successful academic experience, right? And so it is relevant for educators to be able to have conversations about how those things might be impacted by someone's mental health, and being able to help them with the resources around them, like give them some options of who they can talk to. But honestly, sometimes all a student needs is to you know, just have some compassion from the educator they're talking to, and that can just go such a long way, because we've seen the opposite, and how like someone who isn't compassionate can unfortunately have really negative consequences for that student. But if they can just feel like they're heard by their educator, and they can just feel like they care, like, oh my gosh, like you don't even need to say the right things to show them that you care. And so that's what I would say.
That's really good. And I think all of us can think back to a teacher that we've had in the past that made a difference. We may not be able to remember their exact words, but we can remember how we felt from those teachers. So yeah, there's probably a lot of ways that you can do something wrong, but there's also a lot of ways that you can just do something right by just being there and listening. So great encouragement, Allison. Alison and Audrey, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and expertise with our audience. I will be sharing your social media, Instagram. You have some great graphics on there. There are some really helpful resources on Instagram, as well as some other links that we'll share in the show notes. And if you're listening to this, it doesn't matter if you're an engineer, married to an engineer, you have kids that are engineers. If you're a person, you should be reading this book about Decompile Your Mind, because I feel like there's so much in there that's rich about recognizing your emotions and learning how to handle them. So thank you for your work there.
Thank you so
But
much.
for now, we'll stem space out.